Planet Dolan.
From dolls coming alive in the moonlight to invisible gunmen stalking us, the Planet Dolan crew reenacts some of the best true stories from our subreddit about the scariest encounters we've had with the supernatural, Part 4. I'm Hellbent, and today I'll be your narrator. Number 10 was submitted by Sophie10. When Andymations was visiting her grandmother's house once, she decided she was tired and went to bed. In the room she was staying in, there were these two Japanese dolls sitting on the window. The room was dark, but you could see the dolls clearly in the moonlight. Suddenly, she glanced at them, only to see their heads turning. She was so scared she hid under her covers, covered in sweat from the fear. She heard a loud thud, held her eyes shut, and curled up into a ball. When she finally woke up in the morning, the dolls' heads were laying on the floor next to her bed. Number 9 was submitted by Liam is the best! Robo believes her home is definitely haunted. One night, she was walking to the bathroom when she saw a huge smoke cloud in the hallway that was in the shape of a person. She quickly ran back to her bedroom, ducked under her bed, and watched as the cloud wandered around her room before floating into another room. Then she saw two white eyes glowing in the corner of the room. After they disappeared, there was no explanation or trace of the cloud. Sometimes, when it's a foggy day, Robo can still see the mysterious cloud eyes looking at her. Number 8 was submitted by Avi Kaplan 27. One night, Gooby and Sacred Snoopy decided to go on a ghost hunt in their basement. They started by recording Snoopy asking questions to any spirits that might be present. They played back the first recording and were sure they heard something. At the end of each recording, they could hear a word being whispered. Snoopy read the words back, and they read, "I can't get out of hell unless I steal your bodies." They immediately freaked out and ran out of the basement. They never went ghost hunting again. Number 7 was submitted by Latio SCX1. Sidious and his dad were having a conversation outside of their house one night when a flying object appeared in the sky above them. They could tell it wasn't a plane nor a drone, but it was about the size of a car and had no lights on it. It was a very dark night, and they watched as it floated slowly and silently above them. His dad was convinced it was a UFO and tried to take a picture, but the UFO made a sharp turn and instantly disappeared. Still, to this day, they don't know what it could have been. Number 6 was submitted by JoJo Cats 100. When Legna was about 7 years old, he was sitting in his room with his friend Pringle. After talking for a while, they heard a loud crash. Legna thought it was weird because his parents weren't home. Suddenly, a strange feeling like being watched came over them, and at the exact same time, they both turned to look at the wall. There was a shadow of a woman with curly hair moving across all of the walls. The shadow walked into the closet and disappeared. After a few seconds, Pringle investigated the closet. Then, out of nowhere, he screamed. Pringle was so startled that he vowed to never tell a soul what he saw in the closet. Number 5 was submitted by DreadWolf115. When Spinal Palm was 11 years old, he was at home with his sister. His sister went to bed and he decided to play some video games. He heard some footsteps coming up the stairs and said,
"You're home early, Mom."
But he didn't get a reply. He went to the stairs and looked down, but there was nothing there. Then suddenly he heard his sister scream, so he ran and busted open the door. But when he got there, she was sound asleep. Suddenly, he felt a cold chill pass by him and a voice that said, "Turn around." Before he knew what was happening, he fell unconscious on the floor. The next morning, he woke up in bed and his mom tried to convince him that it was all just a bad dream. Number 4 was submitted by Red Degon 4202. Gergak and Tulip were once hiking through the woods in Grand Rapids, Michigan when they heard a snapping noise. They turned around but couldn't see anything suspicious, so they kept walking. Suddenly, Tulip screamed and Gergak turned around to see him being dragged by an invisible force through the woods. He ran after him and they ended up at an empty campsite. There were clothes laying everywhere and empty food containers. It was really creepy. Once Gur got caught up, they ran for their lives back to safety and never went walking down that trail again. Number 3 was submitted by DistroxDeGrand. Every so often, a very tall man appears in Ramona's neighborhood. He lurks where people can see him, usually around tall windows or at the end of dark streets. He never shows his face, hiding it in the shadows or behind walls. Nobody knows who the man is or if he's even human at all. There are rumors that he's related to the legendary Slender Man. Wherever he came from, everyone in our neighborhood knows that if you see him after dark, you should immediately run away. Number 2 was submitted by RedJack101. Dolan was in the park opposite of his house one time when he heard a loud bang. He looked around, but there was nothing unusual, so he kept playing with his friends. They heard it again, and this time they could see a figure holding a gun and pointing it at him. He ran back to his house and looked out of his window, but nothing was there. It was like it never happened. 2 days later, he was sitting in his room when he casually looked out of the window, and there in the park was the gunman pointing his gun at his window. He hid, rubbed his eyes, and looked back out. The gunman was gone again. He never saw him again. Have I had any other encounters with the supernatural? Yeah, I could think of one. I believe that I have a sixth sense that has saved my life several times. Say that 5 times fast. It's happened quite a bit, but I'll just bring up 3 instances. When I was young, my father and I were driving past a golf course when I suddenly just felt like closing the sunroof. Not but a few seconds after the sunroof was closed, we heard a loud ding. A golf ball had hit the car right where I was sitting. If the sunroof wasn't closed, that would have binged me right in the head and probably killed me, if not put me into some kind of coma. Another time, I was getting off the school bus and about to cross the street to walk all the way home. I was standing in front of the bus, ready to cross the street, when I had a sudden urge just to take a nice stretch. And right as I did that, a Firebird came screeching across the street at about 80 miles per hour. If I didn't feel the urge to take that stretch, I would have been splattered across the pavement. Another time, I was at a burger joint with a really long line, and halfway between waiting, I decided, I want tacos instead. Turns out, right after I left, an armed robbery took place and several people got shot. Now, I'm not saying I have psychic powers. Actually, that's exactly what I'm saying. I'm a fucking psychic! I decide who lives and who dies! Huge thanks for the folks over on our Planet Dolan subreddit for submitting their stories. And it's that time again. We got another question for you. What was your angriest moment ever? Let us know on the Reddit page linked below, and you might be featured in a future countdown. And that's all I got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in your sleep.
Thank you.